Welcome to the Assistant Lab podcast, hosted by Victoria Wratten and Anel Martin.
This podcast is dedicated to the executive assistant profession, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
We've created this podcast for the outliers, the linchpins, the assistants who are serious about their careers. This is a podcast for those who are preparing for the future today.
This is a space for no-nonsense content, benchmarking and tracking industry and world trends, as well as interesting interviews with exceptionally inspirational people. The goal here is to stimulate new ways of thinking and being in this profession.
So, on with the show.
Welcome to our first inspirational interview of this podcast show. It is the wonderful and amazing Katie McEwan, Business and Community Affairs Manager at Anne Summers, but previously Executive Assistant to Jacqueline Gold, now the Chair of Anne Summers. Just adding in that she's also the Chair of FEPAA. So enjoy, get inspired, and take some great advice and tips away.
Okay, so Katie, it's so great to meet you online today. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the start of your career. You know, take us back to the beginning, right after school, and how your career progressed from there.
Okay, crikey. So I went to an all-girls grammar school in Essex, where I grew up. And after school, I went on to university. Actually, I went to university in Northern Ireland, which was a bit of a trek from Essex in England. And I studied music and drama. And I chose that university because I wanted to do performance in both. And there were very few prestigious universities that allowed you to kind of do that kind of split course. When I left university, I went straight into television production, actually, via a few work experience and odd jobs in theatres. So I was a part of a backstage crew at a number of theatres locally. And then I kind of got a break in TV. And by break, I mean A-days, free work experience on a BBC production of Waking the Dead, and actually my desk space for the day was next to a cadaver, so it was pretty gross, but I think probably something that's carried me through my career, actually, as I was preparing for this podcast, has been really sheer determination to prove people wrong. And so I think people obviously expect in a TV work experience capacity for someone just to turn up and expect it's really easy. And I made a point of working incredibly hard. And so one day become a few days, become actually one paid day. And then eventually I got into TV production, which is where I really wanted to be. And in that, I was doing a lot of script edits. I was production runner initially. So I was doing kind of a lot of administration and looking after kind of directors and producers in a freelance capacity. And I worked, for about 3 years in TV, pretty much without a break. That is freelance lifestyle, because you're always terrified of where your next paycheck is coming from. And actually, I realised quite quickly that freelance lifestyle wasn't going to be for me. I needed more consistency of knowing my working pattern. Even the days I was working and the hours I was working. And so actually quite serendipitously, I was headhunted for the role for Jacqueline at Anne Summers by a friend of a friend, actually in television. And I thought, why not?
I must tell you what's so interesting is, I also studied drama, and I actually went into the profession via industrial theatre. So that's incredibly interesting. And I do think there's a lot of transferable skills.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
And that's what I'm kind of asking you now, Katie. I know your backstory and I know it very, very well, but there are a lot of people in this profession who come into roles like being executive assistant to Jacqueline Gold, and they haven't come up this traditional route that's been sold how was the transition for you from production and to becoming EA to the CEO of Ann Summers?
Honestly, it was a massive culture shock. And even though now I've been at Ann Summers for a long time and feel it is a completely corporate environment in comparison to other industries, compared to television, it was incredibly corporate to me. I hadn't had a formal interview in television ever, so the point of a CV was pretty redundant. You got jobs on the back of how successful you had been working for your production coordinator or producer previously, and they usually carried you on to other jobs. And so having to go through a formal interview process and prepare a CV even, I felt wildly out of my depth. And I remember those early days at Ann Summers thinking, what am I doing here? I'm playing at being a grown-up. This is ridiculous. But like I said just a moment ago, I have always had a very steely determination to prove others wrong. And so I actually remember Jacqueline's EA who left not on great terms, I would say, but we were together at a dinner because I joined in January, so we all met up for a Christmas dinner before I joined the business. And she said to me, "I'll give you 2 weeks." And
I didn't realise that.
Yeah. And she had been with Ann Summers for 9 years, and I always wanted to prove her wrong, always. So now I'm 14 and a half years in, and I think I have.
That's incredible. Now, just coming back to, you mentioned there the 9 years, but you've spent 10 years as Jacqueline's EA specifically, and then you transitioned into business affairs and communication manager. How do you feel that the EA role prepared you for this new chapter?
Oh, in so many ways, and I know that both of you will just echo a lot of my I guess a lot of my sentiment. But the first is, I think, as EAs, you are incredibly resourceful, and not just resourceful, but I think we become experts at many things. So I call it expert generalists, because you have to become an expert in everything that you're given, essentially. And one of the skills I think I had working for Jacqueline and developed working for her was being able to take a new subject matter or take a new interest and be able to learn as much as I possibly could about it, and act as a sponge, and then be able to translate that information in a way that is really concise, but also where there is additional detail to, sometimes to a microscopic level, be able to pick up on that and be able to know it inside out, back to front, but be able to take it to a top line. And I think that's probably one of the great things that has carried me forward into my current role. I also think that in working at that level of the business, at a CEO level, you do have that helicopter view. And I think one of Jacqueline's great strengths was able to see through the barriers that operationally might get in the way. And I think that's probably something that's also carried me through into my new role, because to a degree, I'm able to remove myself from the nitty-gritty of some of that operational stuff and take it up a level and think, what do ultimately we want to be able to achieve, and then how can I help remove the barriers to get there? And I think that definitely has helped. And I guess the other thing I'd say is definitely around relationships and impact and influence, because as you well know, as an EA, you have to have the spectrum of everybody in your black book. And
absolutely.
And I don't mean that in a sort of Machiavellian way. It isn't a means to an end. It's more about actually building really fulfilling relationships with everyone, because you are that person's brand. And so actually what's been a blessing in my new role is being able to build that for my brand and on my terms. But I guess from a relationship point of view, it's really important to me. In fact, it's a critical part of my role now, to have really collaborative, effective working relationships with literally the whole business.
And, just to tie back to what you were saying, I think it's so interesting. I always say to delegates and to EAs that I train with, when you are in this position, you're getting management training for free. You are either learning what to do or what not to do in equal measures. But I do think it's a powerful way to train for the next step.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm sure if Jacqueline were here now, she'd be quietly laughing to herself, because there's so much of the kind of leader and the role I do today that is absolutely born out of her training, guidance, support, leadership style, because we worked together for a very long time.
And mentors are so important. Having that, I think, a strong female leader you can look up to and see how it's done, I think that's incredibly powerful, more powerful than any kind of formal training you could ever go through.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I mean, I know you well, and I know that you took on this extra role, because it is a bit of an extra role for people. I've done it myself, been there, got the t-shirt, but you did this before you took on this new role, and that was people management. And now it's very all-encompassing. It's a massive part of your role. People manage the executive support team of Anne Summers. And I wanted to touch upon that, because some PAs and EAs don't like it or are frightened of it, don't really know what to do if it happens to them. And some positively actually want to add that as part of their bandwidth, but don't really know what it takes to be a good people manager. What are your kind of general thoughts on people management?
So I think a lot of people feel that it is a way to progress their career, is taking on people management. I do think that everyone is capable of being a people manager, but it takes, I guess, a lot of confidence in yourself. And when I first became a people manager, I was really process driven, because that's all I had. I needed a handbook to tell me what to do. So if there was a sickness process, I'd follow it. And of course, that is hugely important, particularly in corporate businesses, to have those policies and procedures that you need to follow. But it was actually taking on an EA for Jacqueline as my role was kind of transitioning, called Lucy, and who you'll know, Vic. And actually, I would say Lucy taught me more about people management than I was ever able to teach myself or be taught, because Lucy was, and still is, an exceptional performer. And actually, that was a real challenge for me because it meant that I had to try and support her to keep her in the business, to motivate and inspire her, and also not to micromanage her. And actually, what she taught me was it's okay to treat every individual as an individual and not come out with your textbook style for everybody, because everyone's different. And of course, there's a lot that Jacqueline's taught me around leadership along the way, which is don't be beholden to the rules. Do kind of follow your gut and trust your gut a little bit more with people. It won't often lead you wrong. And I think that's been invaluable advice. And so I guess my tip is, if you want to get into people management, and I think it has to be a want, not because you think it will get you somewhere else, then it is probably the most rewarding part of my role, to be honest, because the opportunity to build, develop, nurture talent, develop talent, be able to see people's career grow is genuinely very, very satisfying for me. And the other thing I would say is, I think the other thing that puts people off people management is the difficult stuff, is those difficult conversations. But I think people often believe that they need to be confrontational, and they don't. And often when you have to enter a difficult conversation, that person will know or will have an instinct that something is coming. And some of the best advice that I was given was rip the plaster off quickly.
Yeah.
So to go into it and say, this isn't going to be an easy conversation for either of us to have. And then once you've ripped the plaster off, and I don't mean that in a callous way, I actually mean it in an empathetic way, because what it does is it plates the meeting or the difficult conversation in the way that you want to, and then you're able to actually get into a more truthful and honest and open conversation.
Absolutely. You know, I do a lot of training around difficult conversations, and you said a very true thing. Set the expectations, know what your rules of engagement are, and being assertive and having that difficult conversation has nothing to do with aggression or with a horrible conflict kind of situation if you're handling it correctly. That's brilliant advice. Thanks for sharing that, Katie.
Pleasure.
So research suggests Gen Z and millennials will go through 4 completely different professions in their lifetime now, rather than working their way up this traditional career ladder. What are your thoughts on this?
Gosh, I mean, I am a millennial. I'm already into my second career. So I guess it makes perfect sense to me. I feel like it's quite freeing and liberating to not feel that you have to have a job for life. And so I kind of feel that societally that makes sense. People aren't in anything really for the long term anymore. We are real multiple consumers of everything in bite-sized chunks. So it doesn't surprise me that that applies to careers as well. But I also think it has massive advantage for businesses because where you acquire skills and you acquire talent, you're often getting a different breadth of skill set and expertise and experience from different industries and different roles along the way. So I guess if as somebody that is responsible for a team and a recruiter, it quite excites me to think about what talent you can bring into a business from non-traditional routes.
And I think also what you're touching on there is the cross-pollination, you know, and also having those divergent personalities, those divergent skill sets makes you better positioned to innovate and be more creative within the business. So I think that's quite powerful.
Well, definitely. The one thing I would add to that, sorry, Vic, is that businesses need to adapt, though, to that kind of mindset and skill set, and not still seek out traditional routes, because you might have to, well, you will have to adapt your style based on a very diverse team with different experience.
And yeah, and I think that's part of the issue with employers, is that they are still, and the education sector, still selling this traditional route. You've got to go to secretarial college or get a PA diploma, and you've got to do X, Y, and Z before you can become EA to the CEO. But it's just been proven not to have been the case. And I think actually our own industry is still selling this traditional, here's the levels, here's the duties associated. And actually the proof's in the pudding with Katie, and also one of our other members who will be interviewing soon, who was actually a professional ballerina. And she came straight from being a ballerina into an EA to a very senior director at a university.
And I think, sorry, Vic, I think it would be an interesting discussion, because I think a lot of people who sort of, I mean, from my own experience, I know, I also came into the profession without any background, just with grit and, you know, hard work and good reputation, and parachuted into a very senior person's office. And the resistance that you have from those people who followed that traditional line, I think that could be food for quite an interesting discussion.
Well, definitely, because I followed the traditional line, didn't I? I did it all properly and I went up the career ladder, but it never, I actually found that I had more synergies often with people like Katie, who'd come in from different backgrounds. It's not that I'm here to destroy people who came up the traditional route like me.
No, not at all.
It was that kind of big picture thinking about the role, and sometimes I didn't find that in some of my peers who'd been through the exact same journey as me, if that makes sense. And that leads me nicely onto another big question for the chair of FEPAA, one we talk about a lot, but there's still, and it irritates me no end, but there is still, and I'd say even more so now at the moment, there's still a disparity between this whole just an admin, the disparity between employers versus recruiters versus the profession themselves. It's kind of, I think we are at a bit of a crux point now. Where do we go from here? How are we finally going to nail this? Because it just seems to be like a hamster on a wheel type motion, and it's very frustrating for a lot of people. What are your kind of thoughts on
that? Probably a bit controversial.
Go for it. We love controversy.
This is what we're here for.
Well, I guess I can only use my own career as a benchmark, but I didn't sit and wait for somebody to do it for me. And likewise, whilst we at FEPAA do some incredible things to help put some guidance and boundaries around that, and really talent map and do some great stuff there, we're not going to do it for every single person. It's not actually possible. So I do think there is a bit of a life lesson that no one's going to go and do it for you. And very early on at Ann Summers, and in fact throughout my career, as I said, I knew that no one was going to do it for me. So all I did, and all I have continued to do throughout my career, is do the very best job I can, prove people wrong all the time. I still do that now to this day, because that isn't something that leaves you as you progress up a career ladder or switch careers. I think in the type of role that we do, that is always a bit of a pitfall, a potential pitfall. But that shouldn't stop you from continuing to prove people wrong. And that isn't with noise, and that isn't with chest beating. That is just doing a great job and continuing to do a great job and push and take on new opportunities. And I also have been very vocal throughout my career. I've shared my frustrations when I think things have been unfair or unjust, or if my ability has been determined by someone because of the title of my role, or if my ability has been downplayed in any way. I've been vocal about that. Not shouting, not throwing my toys out the pram, but by sharing that with my line manager, which was often Jacqueline and now Vanessa. And I have been very, very fortunate to be championed by some great women who equally haven't really ever bought into the title is what a person's capability is of. And actually what that does is it does the absolute opposite, because it means that people do value that title of EA. It means that people do really get what you do. It means that people don't take your skill set for granted. It means that when you are at the table, people don't expect you to be the person that pours the tea. And
you've been through a journey at Ann Summers of professionalising the profession. I mean, I've watched it. I met you in 2011 at what was the Office show, embarrassed you hugely, but then we've known each other all these years. If you look at now, having been there 14 years, you have put that as a profession on the map within Ann Summers, haven't you, which some PAs are still kind of struggling with within their companies.
Yeah, and I think that's twofold. That's partly the culture of our business. I think genuinely no role or title is undervalued or devalued at Ann Summers, but I also would like to think that some of that is because of the drive of just ensuring great performance, not just for me but for my team, and also showing the value that we can add across a diverse range of subjects and projects, and ultimately I think that's probably what makes the difference, because if you're just showing continual value add, continual great quality, actually any business, it can't refuse that.
Any role,
that
any
would be
business.
poor commercial sense.
Exactly. Katie, I must tell you, I had goosebumps when you were talking about doing that work consistently, adding the value. You know, those are all signs that point to an incredible personal brand, which is part of the reason that you had that trust and you have been elevated into a different position. You know, like you said, it's not something that external forces control. It's something you determine by your production, your attitude, your work ethic.
So what very quickly, because I'm keen to know this, I've never asked you, what's been your biggest lessons learned over all this since you've been an EA and then made the transition over? What's been the lessons learned? Because we've all learned some big lessons during our careers.
Yeah, funnily enough, and it's probably one I've only learned in the last couple of years. And I think it comes with age. And I don't mean age as a number, I mean age as experience and wisdom, but to not care so much about what people think. Because when I was talking about that consistency, particularly as a younger person, my frustrations could boil into a bit of a hothead approach. I would lose my rag, I think it's fair to say, and I, that wisdom and age, I think, helps to pacify yourself, because you grow a bit of a thicker skin about that kind of thing. But secondly, I know now that I don't actually have to worry about what people perceive my role to be. And I've had it in recent years where, people have joined the business and they still don't get what I do, but that's okay. I don't need them to. I'll just show them, and then they'll get it. And that's actually been one of the really liberating things for me, and probably the biggest lesson learned is I cannot control what other people think of me, but what I can control is the quality and the consistency of my work and how I carry myself, and then they will come on the journey with me.
Absolutely. Preach it. I must tell you, I'm so on board for what you're saying. And I think it does. You talked about, it's almost like mellowing like fine wine. Certain things just don't get under your skin anymore. You kind of just taper it all down. And again, if you are in an environment, and I always say this to people, and I've experienced it in my life, if you're in an environment where you're adding value but not valued, somebody will fetch you from there. You won't stay there, but you've got to keep adding the value for the next person to spot the talent.
Yeah, totally.
And I totally related to what you were saying, because I was very hot-headed early on in the city. I really relate to that. I'm just thinking about my lessons.
Well, the thing is, I think I'm trying to watch how I phrase it, to be honest, because I know that if I were in my 20s, if someone in their 30s had turned around to me and said, it's, as you get older, that will change, it would have been a red rag to a bull, and it would have frustrated me even more. So I want to be cautious in what I say, because I think it's possible at any age to develop that skill set. It just took me a bit longer.
And me too.
Same.
But I think that was down to the environment I was in, which was very chauvinistic at that point. So I felt I had to fight a little bit harder and faster to keep that kind of brand as an EA and have a voice. But yeah, I've definitely mellowed out a lot more now. I like that.
And I can relate to that, Vic, having started in the construction industry, you can imagine, so having to kind of, stand your man, so to speak. You had to acquire some of that just to survive.
Would you, and I'm putting you on the spot now, Katie, I'll probably get a text later saying, I hate you for doing this, but looking back now, is there anything you would have done differently, or are you happy with how it's gone from being at university, production, theatre, over to Anne Summers, and now you've got this all-encompassing role there? Is there anything you would have done or would like to have happened differently?
Honestly, I don't think so. I don't look back and think I wish I'd have done that. I wish I'd have maybe done this. I definitely don't look back with any regrets. I'm really glad I went into television and I got to scratch that itch, I guess. I certainly don't look in any way back forlornly at that period of time with rose-tinted glasses. I still look back with a very crystal clear view of just how challenging it was. And I really feel like I struck gold. I know that sounds like a big pun because of Jacqueline's surname, but I do feel like I struck gold working at Ann Summers, because I have had continual development, and I've got to work for a great family, not just Jacqueline, but my line manager now, Vanessa, her sister, is incredible. Our managing director, Maria, is amazing. Our CMO, Natalie, is amazing. Our people and culture director, Amelia, is amazing. So I work for some incredible women and men. And I really get to have a very unique view of the total business. So there isn't anything I'd change. I absolutely love my role now, but I don't actually think I'm the sort of person that would look back and want to change anything anyway. I'm not that sort of sentimental. I'm much more future facing. So I'd find it difficult to change anything, to be honest.
Oh, I think you've had an extraordinary career, Janet, and I, for one, will never regret putting my hand up at the office show. And I know, I'm not sure if I've ever told you the story, but Jacqueline was a keynote speaker at what was the office show, and she talked to, she was getting a lot of questions from the PAs in the audience, about her career and you know, how she became the CEO of Ann Summers. And I just came in at the end and was like, Jacqueline, is your PA here? And she was like, yes, she is. And we're on stage. So we made a beeline over afterwards, me and another PA, Laura, and that set our working relationship, which then became a friendship, and then obviously a hell of a lot more as well. But I have enjoyed watching your career and everything you've done. I think you're incredibly inspirational, and are to lots of budding assistants, and those assistants now that have frankly lost their mojo and are sitting there thinking, where do I go from here? I'm bored, I want more. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think we say it out loud often enough, but I think your story in particular is a bit of a pin-up for the PAs sitting there now who've lost some mojo.
I guess what I would say is I've never ever been bored in my role. And actually, I think that's probably because of actually Ann Summers generally, is that there's always too much to do and too few people to do it, generally speaking. And that's retail generally as a sector, I would say. I've never been bored, and I think I would deeply empathise with any PA who is feeling restricted because of a salary or because of a location or because of flexibility, but is bored in that role. And I would say, if that is you and you are in that position, then I would do one of three things. I would be genuinely seeking out in the business where you can get greater opportunity, and that might not be through your line manager. You might have to think really laterally about that. I would obviously be thinking about where your next move might be beyond that, and is that within your current role? Is that taking on new roles, or is that leaving the organisation? And I guess the third thing is, which is a bit introspective, but if you are bored, is there anything that you're doing that is fostering that?
Yeah, totally agree. And also, you know, just to tie back to that point, I think it's incredibly powerful if you are in that moment, reaching out to projects, putting your hand up, saying, I've got extra bandwidth, but not just sitting and waiting for something to happen to you. Coming back to your earlier point, making it happen, you know, because sometimes that's the breakthrough.
Yeah. And I honestly think that's the difference. I'm know Vic well enough, and I know a lot about you, to know that that's probably one thing we all have in common, is that we would never have waited for somebody to ask us or to expect to be given something on a plate, because it doesn't happen. You have to go out and ask for it, and show willing. And maybe that is a millennial thing versus a Gen Z thing, but certainly I have never ever sat around waiting for someone to come to me with work.
Ladies, you're making me feel so old. I'm the only Gen Xer on this call today.
Well, I grouped you as a millennial, so yeah.
Thanks.
That's
I'll take it.
But I think in kind of wrapping this up, I think the big thing is with my mantra, I love the movie The Holiday when the Oscar-winning director is having lunch with Kate Winslet's character, and he says, "Why are you acting like a supporting lady? You should be the leading lady of your own life." And I'm not, genderizing the professional female, but that's something I took away. It's my movie, my career, my life, and the only person that's going to push things along is me. End of. And it was a very empowering. I still watch that movie every year. I think it's great, but it's you are the leading star of your own career. I like that.
and I must tell you, Vic, when I have to get serious and really focused, I always think of myself as Liam Neeson in Taken. I channel my inner Liam Neeson. We are here to get things done. So I totally relate to that. That's absolutely gorgeous.
Well, Katie, thank you very much. What a way to start off our podcast series in terms of the interviews. Honoured you. I know how busy your diary is. I literally know how busy it is. So I'm really honoured we managed to get some time in with you today. I know this is going to go down incredibly well. And thank you again for all the time you've given up for EPA over the years as well. Just reminding everyone she is the chair of EPA and has been since the start. And we hugely appreciate it. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for asking me. I've had a whale of a time, and I hope that it proves useful to anyone listening.
I'm sure it will, Katie. There was so much gold dust and gold nuggets in today's interview. I'm sure there will be huge takeaways for the listeners.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks both.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Assistant Lab. If you enjoyed this content, you know what you need to do. Feel free to share it and help us grow our subscriber base.
Join us again next time. And until then, keep experimenting, innovating, and improving your skill sets.